Today's guest is David Frodsham, who is a corporate finance advisor, business school lecturer, and podcaster. And we'll be discussing why do some companies need lots of capital and others none at all. I'm Tony Wood from CEO Collaborative Forum, and let's hear CEO Reflects. David, a very warm welcome back. I've been really excited about this topic, and it kept me up last night just thinking about talking to you and discussing some of these issues. So a warm welcome.
Thank you, Tony. Always a pleasure.
So one of the things that I thought about in the businesses that I've started and I've worked with other people in is there's this difference between getting money, getting VC money, and then having a bootstrap business. And I was trying to figure out, because the question is, why do we have that difference? And I was sitting there and I was going, well, what might cause it? Why does that happen? And why do we not have that initial thinking? Is it something to do with our background, our emotions, our confidence, not wanting to borrow money? I mean, what is it for you? What drives it?
Yeah, it's really interesting one. I think many more businesses could be bootstrapped, actually.
Okay.
You could the people sort of assume it's a badge of honor. I've raised money. My company is valued at 5.8 million or something. It's part of the macho side of it, which really isn't helpful, actually, from the development of the business. And yes, you quit your job where you're being paid a monthly salary, and you go into something where you're very lucky to be paid anything at all, and you're going to need money. The companies do need money in order to work. But it's quite interesting that in countries where capital is scarcer, so that, for example, in Central and Eastern Europe and in Southern Europe, there's been less access to capital than there has been in the UK or Germany. Well, Germany or Scandinavia, and we've seen some marvelous companies come up which have really just been bootstrapped. They've just done it through, doing the odd job to keep the cash flowing, and then working on the product in whenever they can.
I mean, is it possible if we could first of all talk about what we mean by VC or using money and then bootstrap? So maybe if we start with
Yeah,
venture
sure.
capital or
Yeah,
taking
yeah.
money.
Well, if I actually start one step before that, is that
Sure.
you mentioned borrowing money rather
Yes.
than. So most of venture is all really essentially equity investment. It's sometimes structured as a loan, but it is an equity investment, and that means they're buying shares of the company. You, as the founder, no longer own 100%. You own something less, and your investor is coming along on the ride with you. But if you go to your rich aunt and say, "I, Tony, have got a fantastic idea. Will you invest?" She'll probably say, "Tony, here's some money, and but I'd like it back when you can. Don't squander it." And that is that would be a loan. I mean, I think that banks are not are becoming worse, really, a source of funding. But yeah, so the second part of your question really was about
Yeah,
the sort of.
sorry, if I could just break into that, because I think that a lot of people would see that when you get money, you're actually borrowing it because you kind of feel like you have to give it back. So I think that distinction between someone is actually buying a part of your company, and so you're not taking money from someone, you're saying, here's my stall, here's my whole, give me money to help me to grow my business faster than I would do normally. And it's not a loan. But I always feel like, I don't know, there's something in me that says that I've got this money, I need to make sure I give it back. And we've always taught, especially in the UK, is, not to get into debt. You can't get into debt. You can't borrow money. How do you help fix or help that entrepreneur mindset?
I'm going to use a COCF expression, the conditions of satisfaction. What needs to happen for you to be satisfied with this business arrangement? The reality is your rich aunt who lends you, let's say, £50,000, her
God, I
condition
want
of
one of
satisfaction.
those. How do I get one of those,
Okay,
David?
all right, £5,000, right? But
Okay, thank you.
but her condition of satisfaction probably is would be that she gets her money back. If you give me,
Right.
I lend you 5,000, and you give me 5,000 back, I would be satisfied.
Yeah.
Um, whereas with a venture capitalist, their model is that money that goes in has to become very much bigger. I can explain why if you want, but it
Mm,
has to really become 10x. So if they
okay.
give you 5,000, their conditions of satisfaction is that they get 50,000 back.
Okay, so that's quite a lot. So for them to give you the money, your idea has to be spot on, and you have to, I'm guessing, be completely and utterly 100% in, or
You
else
have
they
to be
just won't give
100%
it to
in.
you.
I mean, people are not going to invest unless you're committed. If you're doing it half-heartedly. I mean, that's the other advantage of a bootstrap business is that you've got more freedom to go at the pace, develop the company at the pace that you want. And I
Okay.
mentioned that there are a lot of bootstrap businesses coming out of places where capital is scarcer. If I go back
Mm,
earlier in my career, Germany is a country that has a very well developed debt market through banks and through other organizations, and a less well developed equity market. It's rather changed more recently, but that certainly used to be the case. And a classic thing for a German company to get going is they go with a small bank loan, and they'd start with some consulting work or some things to get themselves going, and then from that they built some IP, and
yeah.
from that and then they build their company up, and you have these post-war very successful family-owned businesses that have now become world leaders and so on, essentially built without external equity investment. Because of course the other problem
But
with
that takes
external,
time, doesn't it?
it does take time. It does. That's the one of the arguments that a professional investor will use is that you need me because otherwise it's going to take you forever. And technology doesn't stand still. If you want to be a technology leader, you've got to be quick. Now that's true of cutting edge technologies, but if you're, I don't know, if you're an engineering company, or I met a company recently that's kitchen. They bootstrap business making kitchens,
Hmm.
and they had to buy equipment and they had to have salespeople and so on. It's all very capital intensive, and it'd been running at a loss for many years, but
Right.
they'd never had any external investment.
Okay.
And it was all done through the way that they ran the business in terms of the relationship with the customers. So
So
it's kind of you need to understand why companies need money,
right.
and therefore, why, where are they going to deploy it?
Well, let's start there, shall we? In your experience, why and where do you think companies need money? So, if we start off with bootstrap is I'm using my own money, I'm selling, and I'm making a profit, and I'm using the profit to help me grow the business. Is that correct? Great. So
Yeah. So I
then,
mean, at its simplest, companies need money because they spend more than they earn, and you
yeah.
generally earn by making sales, and you spend money on your internal costs. But it's kind of, we have to break it down further to get to really what's going on. So the obvious
Okay.
one that I think everyone can really understand is that you're running at a loss, right? So you're spending 1,000 and your sales are 100. You know,
Yeah.
you're making a loss. That will drive a need for cash, not necessarily immediately, but in the long term it will.
Mm.
Um, but in the case of this kitchen company, it was running at a loss for years and still didn't need any capital. So
Okay.
the second one is the driver is the payment cycle, or more technically, the working capital requirement. In that the relationship with your customer becomes extremely important. So, for
Yeah.
example, um, we have the story in the press at the moment that companies providing carers paid for by local government are going bust. They're
Ah.
profitable, they have no capital requirements, but they're going bust because the council is taking months and sometimes years to pay them.
Yes.
If you've got the
Okay.
money in advance, then you can use that money to grow, to do what you want, to grow and even cover your losses. So, for example, supermarkets, where generally they buy their products and then they pay their suppliers on 30 days or 60 days, but they turn the stock over every 7 days, and therefore they actually receive the money for the product before they've had to pay the supplier. That's the reason why many supermarket chains have been family owned, because
Uh-huh.
you can grow without needing external capital. So in the
So
case of the
are you?
kitchen, in case,
Yeah.
so one more example to anyone.
Yeah.
In the case of the kitchen company, you go to them and they sketch out a kitchen and give you a price, and you say, "Wow, that's amazing! I'd love it. Yes, I'd like to buy. Sign here, pay half now." So
Mm.
you've paid for half the kitchen before they've done anything other than send someone out with a piece of paper and give you a sketch.
So you could reduce your need for money by just structuring your contracts in the right way and
Yes.
structuring how you're getting your money. So it sounds like there's we're talking right now. There's two needs to get money. So if I were to get venture capital or additional money into the business, it's either to help me grow quicker or to cover a short term cash flow issue because I'm doing work but I'm not being paid for it. So when would you as a business owner make that decision? What's going through your mind? Because a lot
Okay.
of
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
aren't doing it. How do you make that decision?
I would say to your earlier point, there are other drivers other than those two making
Okay.
losses,
What
and
would
but we can come to those. But
okay.
at what point is very important, because venture investors, venture capital, really don't invest in ideas. They invest later on when the technology is to a certain extent proven. And if you think about it from their perspective, the later they invest, the lower their risk. And they then want to help companies with go to market, with sales expansion, with the team, building the team, and therefore there is a funding gap anyway that an entrepreneur has. Is that very unlikely? Some of the early stage venture investors would disagree with me, but that generally venture investors like to invest when the product is essentially there, and it's got some proof point in the market. There's a
Right.
customer or some trials or something like that. So
So after you got product market fit, you would then say you'd get
yeah, you
extra
don't
money
need
to
to
then
have
scale up or
yeah, you don't necessarily have. Ideally, yes, product market fit,
okay.
but I think investors also like to invest in teams that know how to pivot if they've got it
Okay.
wrong, and they'll say,
Yeah.
"Whoops, left side of ship, going somewhere else." Um, yeah, so
No, that
yeah,
okay.
go
No,
ahead.
so
Sorry.
that's really interesting. So you've got that, but you mentioned there were other types of money apart from wanting to cover debt and also scaling. What would you say would be the ones that you'd recommend or you've seen most commonly?
Well, I think if I ask an entrepreneur why do you need money, they generally say I have to hire engineers, or I have to pay my salaries at the end of the month, or whatever. What exactly did that mean? So it could be losses, as we talked about before, but it could be what you might in software terms call platform development,
Right.
or the development of the offer. It could be that you need to write a lot of software, but it could also mean that you need to design some packaging, you need to um, design the product or a variant of it, or whatever. So building the offer, this is capital,
Yeah.
and it is quite hard to measure, because the chances are you're not going to stop developing. You hire your team of software developers, let's say 10, for the sake to pluck a number from the air. And even when you're profitable, you're still going to have that team in place who are going
Yeah.
to be doing future versions and so on. So, but that is another big area: is how much is it going to cost for you to put your offer to the market? So
So
that
it's
is
okay.
the third area.
Interesting. So there seems to be there's this point where our entrepreneurs need to figure out, I've got an opportunity. They then have to measure how much the opportunity is going to cost, and then they have to go and find someone who's going to give them some money for that opportunity. How do they know when's the right time to do that? And how do they figure out how much they need?
Um, so the time, as I say, that if you're raising venture funds, you're basically you're doing it at a time when there are as many proof points. The technology is proven, the product market fit, as you mentioned, that you've got some feedback from the market, you've got an understanding of the competitive environment. All of those are good proof points for venture investors. I would say that people too often fundraise when they're short of money rather than really having planned that this is a sensible time. I've achieved this milestone, and therefore I need to raise money onto the next milestone.
Right. So it's that thought process of I need to. You got to do it before you get into trouble, basically.
You definitely have to do it before you get into trouble, yeah.
Okay.
And because investors know that if you get close to the cliff edge, they can get a better deal. Horrible thing to say, but
And
it's true.
that doesn't sound fair. Surely this has to be fair, David. Is it fair?
No.
Okay. So it's not fair. So it's totally unfair environment
Well,
where
I
you
think
reason.
I'm going to be. Let me give you a more balanced answer.
Okay.
I think it's important for investors to have a long-term good relationship with the entrepreneurs, so they're not out to screw you in that sense. And also, as every successful investor will tell you, it's not how much you forget how much you put in and what valuation. You remember how much money you made at the end, and so it is it's not quite true. But nonetheless, it certainly makes it easier to negotiate with entrepreneurs if if they're worried about meeting payroll. Yeah, you had a
That's
second part of your question was when do you do it? Or
yeah.
sorry, how much do you raise?
Yeah.
I think there are two answers to that. One is enough money to take you to the next milestone. So the next milestone means that when the next lot of investors would be interested in investing. So if you're a healthcare investor, maybe it's proven, but now you're ready for clinical trials, or the clinical trials are over and you've got FDA approval, or if you're a software business, that you've got the first group of customers, cohort of customers, and you're now looking to scale up. So that is you've got to have enough money to bridge you. It's kind of always think of it as a bridge to,
Yeah.
but it's got to be a bridge to somewhere rather than to nowhere.
So
Um,
you've got to have this thought process in your mind where you're going, here's my vision of where I want to get to, and I've got these steps to go through. So that's a lot of pre-thought and pre-imagining. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that vision that, I want to get to this point, but to have the discipline to break down your thinking into those areas. How would one do that? How would you do that? How do you even start doing that?
Yeah, you're completely right. There are too many entrepreneurs when you say how much do you need, they say 1 million or 10 million or whatever. They haven't really
Mm,
thought it through. So I think there are two answers to your question. One is work out when the next milestone is, and then work out
right.
what money you need in order to get to that milestone, and then have a little bit more, because things always take a little bit longer, or often take a little bit longer. The second one is really to understand the drivers. So these drivers that we've been talking about, there is another one which is incredibly important, which is unit economics. The unit
Okay.
economics is really basically the cost, or how you monetize your customers. If you
Mm,
think of if you think you're in e-commerce, you buy a product and then you sell it.
yeah.
You're kind of investing in the product, and you make your profit later. It's rather the same with customer acquisition. You pay up front to acquire the customer,
Yeah,
You must know this at COCF. You must have a certain amount of money to acquire a new member,
absolutely.
and then the
Yeah,
member pays their dues over the next few years, and that's unit economics for you. The cost of
yeah.
customer acquisition compared with the lifetime value of the customer. Of course, the problem with that is that the more successful you are, the more money you need, because if it
Okay.
costs you, €1,000 to acquire a member, if you're only going to acquire one member, you only need €1,000. But if you're going to acquire 1,000 members, you need 1,000,000. Do you see what I mean? And therefore an understanding of the unit economics is
And
really, really important.
and it is, and I think this is one of the challenges. So if you can help me out, if I'm a startup CEO, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm starting my business. I don't know what my cost of customer acquisition is going to be, and I don't know the lifetime value. I've got to guess it. How do I go about um, having an educated guess on that?
Yeah,
Because I don't have any track record.
very true. There's guess, educated guess, forecast. There's sort of different levels of certainty. It's
And for the record, all of my forecasts are educated. They're not guesses, by the way. Just covering myself there, David, just in case.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, of course, your cost of customer acquisition will generally fall over time
Yeah.
because you become known as an entity, and therefore the customer's been educated or can see things on social media, and therefore you don't have to spend so much time educating them or making them aware. So you say in old-fashioned marketing, building awareness. And so, yes, it is a bit like all planning. It is you have to have your best shot at it and be prepared to adjust it because it'll be wrong, right? It'll be wrong. But I can give you a nice anecdote.
Oh, please.
This is a super secret company that's really quite credibly
Okay.
setting out to change the
We
world.
like we like super secret. You can tell us.
Exactly. And
No,
anyway,
no, nobody's
she's,
going to tell. Okay, we promise you're listening now. You're not going to tell. We have a promise.
uh,
It's okay, David. Go ahead.
she said, I said, Rihanna, how many users are you going to, and what? And she said, well, I mean, I think this really has a potential of to be used by billions of people. Most people on the planet. Fine, okay, but
Okay.
what's your target? And she said, well, I would. I think it's believable that we could get to 10 million users in the first year. So that was it. I
Wow.
thought, oh, that's amazing.
Okay.
Okay.
That'll do.
And then later on in the conversation, I was saying, well, what do you need to do to acquire a customer? Well, I have this ad and I have this activity and so on. I said,
Okay.
well, roughly how much is that? Well, I think it might be $10. I said, okay, let me tell you how much capital you need. You need 100 million.
Okay.
And she goes,
Goodness.
no, I
Okay.
don't. Yes, you do. So, of course, the answer to that is that one of those two numbers is wrong, right? So either the
Yeah.
$10 will very rapidly drop to 1 or cents or zero, or she's not going to get to 10 million in the first year. No one's going to
You know
give
what we
no one's going to give her 100 million as seed
no.
money.
Sadly. I mean, that's probably one thing we should do. We should probably do a cost of customer acquisition and a lifetime value podcast at some point in the future. But how do I know what is reasonable? Because you talk about I'm going to have 10,000, 100,000. What market share? Because we need to be able to put some figures in this. We need to be able to have an understanding as to what is reasonable to talk to a VC about. So if you said, look, I can reach X amount of market share in my business in say 5 years, what percentage would you say would be reasonable for an entrepreneur to say?
Um, I don't think I can give you a number. I
Okay.
think
How would they work it out? Because that's a
well,
good figure,
many
right? It's a good
entrepreneurs
place
are
to
out to
start.
create new markets. That's the problem, right? Is
Ah,
they're not.
okay.
It's less of a better widget market, of saying taking
Right.
something that's existing and making it better, which is but more about the creation of new things. I mean, we're using StreamYard. How would they have worked out the cost of customer acquisition
Yeah.
for them. Okay, they could look at Zoom, they could look at other existing platforms out there, and work it out. That's a sort of kind of comparative. You can look at what kind of um, marketing activities you would do and how many new customers that would generate, and that would give you a cost of customer acquisition. But I completely agree with you. This is a really imperfect science.
Yeah.
I do think I'm a great believer in repeat business and customer retention. And the obviously in the early days you have to acquire the customer, but hang on to them. You know that uh, it's not enough that they come to your e-commerce site and buy one thing. You should have them coming back for more. That they should, and then perhaps they come every month to buy whatever they need.
So
Amazon has
it's
been very good at that.
well, they have been, and I think, but it's also understanding the need, giving them what they need, and at the right price. And I think that's an evolution of your product, and I can see how that in later rounds you could utilize that. But when we're looking at this like a initial, it is a little bit of a step into the dark, and you're
It
not
is.
quite sure what it might be. So one last question on the raising. I want to get on to what any disadvantages about raising money is. How would I convince a VC that what my vision of the future is correct? Are they data based? Are they information based? Or is it if I smile real nicely, will they give me the money?
Probably all of the above, except for the last one.
Oh, damn!
Although, although I have to say, many VCs, uh, what, what was it? Someone described it to me. I don't invest in assholes. It's just
Okay.
because they realize they have to work
Yeah.
with the entrepreneur over many years, and therefore they want to work with people that they like. Okay, so they're looking for the team, the quality of the team, people who've done it before, who are believable. Doesn't necessarily need to be complete, but
Yeah.
they think actually these are people who've got knowledge,
Yeah.
real deep knowledge of the sector, who've got the drive, who've got maybe a track record. I think that's probably number one.
Right.
Secondly, the technology or the offering has a competitive advantage, has some kind of moat to ward off competition. That's very difficult these days because if it's software related, the chances are you could throw some bright developers at it and kind of catch up from a technology perspective.
Yeah.
But they're looking for some kind of moat. It could be in the business model, it could be in the technology, it could be in their um, in the approach to market or the existing
Okay.
customer group, whatever. The the business model does matter. But they are less concerned about that because they know it will evolve and change. So the
Right.
points we've been talking about how can you really be sure about the future? I do find VCs are more interested in unit economics than they are in profit and loss. I think
Just
entrepreneurs
yeah.
know how to use Excel, but really only know how to use Excel in order to produce an income statement, a profit and loss statement. Whereas the investors know that companies with good unit economics will always win in the end, because always the that money from that you get from customers is going to come through in the end, even if it takes a while.
I mean, it's
There are
literally
other things, but
it's a money
I do
machine, isn't
think,
it? Because you know it's there.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Interesting. So the other thing is, so we've talked a lot about how you would know what to get, when to get it, but what about some of the warning signs where it can be seductive to say, well, my company's running well, I'm making a bit of profit. If I got a whole bunch of money, then I'll be rich. So when shouldn't you do it? And what are some of the disadvantages that we can inform people about?
Well, the big disadvantage is if you view this as your life's work and you want to keep this
Ah,
business, you can't do that, because as soon as you raise money from an external investor, essentially you've put a for sale sign on the top of your business because they have to be able to get out, and they'll have
Right.
mechanisms in the investment agreement to achieve that. So that is
Mm.
probably the biggest disadvantage. Um, I You also do lose some control. I mean, you can't really quite do what you want. I came across a fabulous bootstrap business where over nearly 10 years, this bunch of dedicated software developers have built the most amazing platform. We're completely broke as a result, driving beaten up cars and sending their wives out on overtime to be able to, or their other halves, and also sometimes their husbands or whatever, to be able borrowing from their parents just to try and keep the company going. But they had got so far in the development that actually it was not possible to bring it, or very, oh, no, not possible, very hard to bring in an external investor. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. They got their own way of working. They weren't really prepared to be mentored, guided, or whatever. And the company actually ended up being sold because it was a time
Ah.
when it was a time really to let go completely. I would add also that, having earlier said venture capitalists don't like to invest too early, they also don't like to invest too late, because
Right.
if you come in when the company is already doing several million and is established to start with, how it's going to be much harder to take your €1 investment and make it into 10, because that you get from earlier stage up to it's much easier to multiply the value by 10.
So it's
Uh,
interesting. I'd not quite appreciated the thought that as soon as you look to get investment, you're actually saying, I'm looking to exit at some point, whether it's an IPO, whether it's a sale, because you're on the treadmill then, because you've then got to, after a period of time, maybe what, 5 or 10 years, you've
yeah.
got to then, it's got to be worth more. The investor's got to get out, and either you buy it back or you do it.
Well,
So would you
no, that
recommend a
you really only
buyback
buy it
or?
back if it's a failure, because otherwise it's going to be too
Right.
expensive.
Okay. Okay, so literally relinquishing control. So why would anyone do that? I mean, what of the other disadvantages? Have you seen people who've regretted getting money?
Oh yeah. Um,
Okay, any stories?
well, there's a former member of COCF who ended up with a toxic investment agreement. In fact, there are two of them I know,
Interesting.
and where he thought he ended up with 40% of the business, having taken in the investment, or 50% or whatever. But there were so many bad, nasty terms in the investment agreement that he ended up, in both cases, they ended up with very little. So I think understanding the terms, I think the world's got better. Investors are more entrepreneur friendly these days, but not understanding how the relationship between your percentage ownership and your percentage ownership of the economic interests is a source of uh, great angst, great worry for many entrepreneurs. I want to come back to your point, though, if I may, about this kind of
Please.
exit thing, this thing about
Yeah.
taking money in later. There are a whole group of investors, but this is really more private equity than venture capital, who say, okay, you've built a business, well done. Maybe with venture capital, or maybe on your own, or maybe just with your rich aunt, well done. But now we're going to take it global. Now you don't need
Okay.
1 million, 2 million, 5 million. We're going to uh, put more money to play. We're going to acquire your major competitor. We're going to grow into China. We're going to become the world leader. And at that point, what private equity firms do is that they'll buy everyone out, including the founders, and
Okay.
then say, okay, you've made some money. You can go and pay off your mortgage. You can replace your 20-year-old Volkswagen Golf with a Tesla, or whatever you want to do. Take your family on holiday for the first time for 10 years. Um,
Yes, that's
but
generally the
but
way.
you can. But we want you to reinvest. We want you to reinvest half of what you've made back in the new structure, and you're going to make the same amount of money again. You're just going to because we're going to take this from this level up to this level, and that is fine. You realize you've lost control, but you're on the ride. It doesn't really matter if it doesn't work mentally because you've got some money in the bank, but it's an opportunity to work with a more professional team, a more ambitious, more of a global impact, and that is a very interesting area to examine as well for later stage businesses.
Well, that sounds well. Hopefully, we'll get to that. But one final question I want to ask is: it seems that as an entrepreneur, and I know definitely me, you start off and it's the unknown, and I don't know what I'm doing when I start a business. It could be the first time you've done it, and then what happens? The business grows, and then you need venture capital, and you don't really know how to do venture capital, and then you're in the unknown. Then you grow even bigger, and you're into PE, and you don't really know what you're doing because you've never done it before. So we're constantly expecting entrepreneurs to know things and make the right decision without any knowledge. I mean, apart from advisors, how would you recommend an entrepreneur handle this a massive degree of uncertainty? But then also these decisions, as you mentioned a couple of times, you make a mistake and you're out. That's 10, maybe 15 years of your life done.
Join COCF.
Absolutely.
No, you do. You need
True.
people on the journey who've been there before, who can help you, who've seen the situation. I think whether it's COCF or another organization, you need to have that support. I wanted to give you a little anecdote, which I always like very much, about you start your business in one area and you end up somewhere completely different. Well, do you know that there was a successful, I think, Canadian telecoms company called Mitel, which you might think stood for microprocessor telephony or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas a couple of BT engineers who emigrated to Canada and wanted to produce a product, but it missed the market. And so they had to go make a little bit of telecoms equipment in order to be able to make ends meet. So Mitel stood for Mike and Terry's Electric Lawnmowers.
Oh, I love that. That's really cool. No, that's really, really cool. David, look, thank you so much. You've already got 2 other podcasts I want to talk to you about, like later stage businesses and then cost of customer acquisition and lifetime value. Would you please come back and help us just understand some of these areas so we can know where to start to get information?
Always a pleasure, Tony.
Thank you very much, David. That's really kind. And of course, as David mentioned, and I wasn't lining up for that, honest. I honestly believe so for me, joining COCF helped me get move from that naivety that I had to gain some knowledge through conversation and challenges. And I think that's one of the things that I know has really helped me. And so if you can find a great group that gives you knowledge, gives you networking, and gives you that sense of connection, I wholeheartedly recommend you do that. Of course, I'm going to say COCF is what, if you're an international business person, then absolutely that's a good place to start. But David, thank you so much. Hopefully chat again soon. Take care now.
Bye now.